I didn't expect my
I
boss to
think this
lean
is
in
where
that
the paper
close.
jam is.
Not in the middle of a
You're
Tuesday
right,
with
I
the
see it
smell of
now.
burnt coffee in the air and the copy machine coughing like it was on its last leg. "You started this," she said, her voice low, not angry, measured. "Finish it." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even sharp. It was a challenge, a quiet one. And then she walked away before I could answer. That's not how the day began. I'd been working the late shift at her firm for about 6 months. Mostly freelance design, nothing special. The office was clean, muted. White walls, pale wood floors, the hum of a too-cold AC unit that no one wanted to argue about. She had a glass-walled office at the end of the hall. You couldn't not notice her, not because she tried, but because the whole place seemed to fold itself around her pace. Elena. She was in her mid-40s, I think. Smart in a way that made people double-check their own math before speaking. Confident without being loud. The kind of person who listened like she might actually use what you said later. I tried not to stare. Mostly I succeeded. That day, the printer jammed again. Big surprise. And somehow I ended up kneeling on the floor, elbow deep in a tangle of warm paper and toner dust, trying not to swear too loud. She walked by, stopped, and crouched down beside me. Expensive blazer brushing against the edge of a filing cabinet. "Careful," she said, leaning in just enough to point at a hidden latch. "You'll slice your hand if you pull too fast." I froze, her sleeve almost touching mine. Her perfume subtle, like clean linen and something faintly citrus. I muttered something stupid like, "Guess I should have read the manual." She didn't laugh, not really. Just this small shift of her mouth, like she wanted to but thought better of it. "You started this," she said. Eyes not quite on mine, more on the printer, but the words hung there. "Finish it." It sounded like she meant the paper jam. Maybe she did. But the way she said it, low, even close enough that I felt the warmth of her breath for half a second, made the fluorescent-lit office feel suddenly too quiet, too still. I didn't answer. I think I nodded. My hands kept moving, but my brain had left the building. She stood, smoothed her sleeve, and left with a soft, professional. "Let me know when it's running again." Normal. Entirely normal. Except it didn't feel normal. The latch gave way, paper released, machine blinked back to life. My palms were gray with toner. My chest was tight, not from nerves exactly, just something wound too suddenly, too far. The rest of the shift blurred. I remember staplers, emails, someone laughing too loud in the hall. But my attention kept circling back like a stuck compass. The way she crouched beside me, the quiet weight of her words, the tiny pause before she left. That night, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling fan, not tired, not restless, just caught somewhere in between. I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. The next time it happened, it wasn't in the hallway. We were in the conference room late, too late for anyone else to still be in the building. The others had left hours ago. The lights in the outer office were dim, just that green exit sign humming faintly in the corner. We were going over a presentation for a client. Well, she was going over it. I was mostly watching her hands move over the sketches, catching the way her thumb rubbed a corner of the paper without thinking, like her body was trying to work out tension her face refused to show. She kept her tone even, professional. "This line here needs weight. Collapses visually." I nodded, made a note, asked something about scale. She answered, clipped but polite, a rhythm I'd learned to match. But something about her that night was off, softer at the edges. Her laugh, rare, dry, usually tucked behind raised brows, came out once when I said the wrong street name for a project site. Not big, just this half-breath that escaped like she'd forgotten to guard it. It landed in the room like warmth. I caught it, probably stared too long. She noticed. I could tell by the way her posture shifted, just a little more upright, like a wall sliding back into place. We kept working. Every so often, her hand went to the bridge of her nose, rubbing, like she had a headache she wouldn't admit. I noticed how tired she looked when she leaned toward the desk lamp. Not run down, just human. Lines that didn't show in daylight, a heaviness in her eyes that made me want to ask if she was okay. I didn't. She flipped through the mock-ups, sighed quietly. We might have to redo this section. I offered to stay late even though it was already late. She glanced up at me, something flickering there. Hesitation, maybe gratitude, maybe both tangled. You don't have to, she said. I know. Her fingers lingered on the paper before pulling back, almost like they'd brushed against something warm. We worked in silence for a stretch, the kind that isn't empty but careful, like both of us were afraid to break it the wrong way. At one point, our hands reached for the same page. She pulled back first, muttered a quick sorry. Though she hadn't done anything wrong, I shook my head, didn't trust myself to speak. When we finally finished, she leaned against the table, exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Her gaze drifted toward me. Not long, not searching, just there. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It was raining hard the night the client pushed the deadline forward. The whole office emptied early except for us. She stayed to rebuild half a presentation from scratch, and I stayed because leaving her there alone felt wrong, or maybe I just couldn't not. The rain beat against the windows and sheets, streaking the city lights into soft, dripping lines. The hum of the HVAC mixed with the occasional metallic groan from the building settling, like everything was quieter than it should have been. She sat at the head of the conference table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, hair slightly undone in a way I'd never seen. I sat a few seats down, pretending to focus on the renderings, not on the way a single strand of hair kept falling across her cheek, how she brushed it back without looking up, precise and distracted all at once. We didn't talk much, just the shuffle of papers, a muted sigh now and then. At some point, I offered to grab dinner from the corner deli. She hesitated, then said, "Only if you're hungry too." But that wasn't why I went. When I came back, she had loosened her blouse collar, leaned back in her chair, eyes closed for maybe the first time since I'd known her. I placed the food down softly. Her eyes opened, slow, like surfacing from somewhere deeper. "Thank you," she said. Not polite, quiet, real. We ate in silence for a while, the kind that felt like a choice, not an absence. She pushed a carrot around with her fork, then said, "This isn't the life I pictured at 25. It was the first personal thing she'd ever offered without prompt. I wanted to ask, "What did you picture?" But I didn't. I just listened, chewing slower than I needed to. She glanced at me, maybe expecting a joke, maybe hoping I wouldn't give one. "My ex called earlier," she said, almost like an afterthought. "Wanted to talk about the house. He forgets I don't live there anymore." Her voice stayed even, but something in her grip on the fork, tighter, then relaxed, said the call had scraped something raw. I shifted in my seat, wanting to say something, anything, but the words felt clumsy, too heavy in my mouth. Instead, I leaned forward a little, elbows on the table, just enough that the space between us thinned. She noticed. I know she did. Her breath caught, barely, like a soft stutter in the air. We stayed like that, not touching, not talking. Just two people sitting too close in a room too quiet while rain hammered glass and the city outside kept on not knowing. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, "You should go now." And I did. But only my body left that room. The next week blurred into small, loaded normalcies, emails, meetings, coffees placed quietly at the edge of a desk without comment. Neither of us brought up the rain, or the way she told me to leave before either of us did something irreversible. But Thursday night, the firm's lobby was dark by 8, everyone gone. Just her light still on at the end of the hall, spilling a soft rectangle onto the carpet. I don't know why I went in. I told myself I had a question about the revisions, but my mouth stayed empty of anything useful once I stepped inside. She looked up, tired in a way that wasn't just work. Her blazer was folded over the back of her chair. A single earring sat beside her keyboard, forgotten. "You're still here," she said. Not surprised, not annoyed. "So are you," I said. That earned a small exhale that could have been a laugh if it had more strength in it. I stood there, waiting for a reason to turn around. She didn't give one. "You didn't go home," I said finally. "I didn't want to sit in my apartment tonight." I nodded like I understood. I did, but not in a way I could say. Silence again. Long enough for the ticking of the cheap office clock to start feeling like a third presence. Finally, I said it, not because I planned to, but because it pressed too hard against my ribs to keep still. "What are we doing?" Her eyes moved from the monitor to me, slow, deliberate, like she was checking the weight of the question before touching it. She didn't answer. Not right away. "I don't know," she said. So quietly I had to lean forward a fraction just to be sure I heard right. Her voice wasn't shaky. It was steady in the way something resigned is steady, like a chair you know will hold but that you don't really want to sit in. "This isn't," she started, then stopped, pressing her lips together like the rest of the sentence might unravel the room. "I know," I said, and that was worse because it was true, and we both knew knowing didn't matter anymore. I moved a step closer without meaning to. Not even a full step, just enough that the air shifted, warm where it had been neutral. Neither of us reached for the other. Neither of us pulled back either. It was like standing on a fault line that hadn't broken yet. Still solid, but humming with what it was capable of. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. Friday should have been normal. But late in the afternoon, while everyone else was already half out the door for the weekend, she stopped at my desk. "Can you come by my office when you're done?" Her tone was neutral, but there was a kind of weight in it, not heavy exactly, just deliberate. I went. She didn't turn from the window when I walked in, just kept staring down at the street, hands folded in front of her like she was holding onto something invisible. "I got a voicemail today," she said after a while. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. She reached for her phone on the sill, thumbed the screen without looking. "From Mark." The name didn't mean anything to me, but the way she said it, soft, flat, like reading from a file she didn't want to open, made me keep still. "My brother," she clarified, like she'd heard the question I hadn't asked. Still looking out the window, she added, "It's been a year since Daniel died. He wanted to know if I'd go to the cemetery with them this weekend." Daniel. She finally turned then, eyes red at the edges but dry. "My son." I felt the air leave the room like someone had opened a door in a storm. She didn't move. Neither did I. "I don't usually talk about him here," she said, her voice steady in a way that didn't match the words. "People look at you differently after they know. They start to handle you like glass, like you might break if they breathe too close." She gave this faint, almost bitter laugh, the kind you give when there's nothing funny left. "I was 23 when I had him," she said, "and now I'm 46 and people still treat me like I'm just a name on a resume. They don't see what's missing. They don't see what it costs to keep showing up like you're fine." I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat locked. She walked back to her desk, picked up a photo frame I'd never noticed before. Small, black, clean lines, like everything else in her office. She held it out, not quite to me, more like into the space between us. A boy, 17 maybe, dark hair, same eyes. I took it from her without meaning to, careful like it might break. She watched me hold it, watched my fingers trace the edge like it could tell me something words couldn't. Then she exhaled, slow, long, like she'd been holding that breath for a year, maybe longer. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years. And for the first time, she looked at me without fear. We didn't talk much after that. She sat down behind her desk again. I stayed standing for a while, not sure if I should leave or sit or say anything at all. But leaving felt wrong. like stepping out of a room mid-sentence, knowing the most important part hadn't been said yet. Finally, she gestured to the chair across from her. Not formal, just a flick of her fingers that carried more permission than words ever could. I sat. The city moved outside her window, cars sliding past, people carrying umbrellas they didn't really need anymore. But in that office, it felt like the world had gone very still. "You remind me of him," she said, eyes somewhere between the street and me. "Your son?" I asked quietly. She nodded, then shook her head almost in the same motion. "Not exactly. More like, you make the air feel like it used to, before everything got heavy." I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't want to cheapen it with some neat little line that belonged in a movie. So I just stayed with it, let it land, let it ache. She leaned back, exhaled. "I keep telling myself to be careful, that this is wrong, that we're not supposed to." She trailed off, pressed her palm to her forehead like the thought itself hurt. "I know," I said. We let the silence fill in the rest. All the shouldn'ts, the not-yets, the lives already built and half-broken. And then, like a tide that stopped pretending it wasn't coming in, something shifted. She didn't move much, just rested her hand on the edge of the desk, fingers half-curled, close enough that if I leaned even slightly, I didn't mean to, but I did. My fingers brushed hers. Not a grab, not a decision, just contact. Warm, unsteady, alive. She didn't pull away. She turned her palm up, slow, like testing a fragile hinge, and let our hands fit together in the smallest way two hands can fit. Barely there, but enough to undo weeks of pretending. We stayed like that, no words, no sudden rush of passion. Just two people finally stopping the fight against whatever this was. Eventually, she let out a breath that sounded like surrender and relief tangled into one. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down. And that was louder than any "I love you" ever could be. I'm telling you this now from a different season. The rain has passed. The office isn't ours anymore. I took a job somewhere smaller. She scaled back her hours. We don't see each other every day like we used to, but sometimes, when I'm waiting for a train or making coffee in my kitchen, I catch a smell that reminds me of that toner-dusted hallway, of the night the storm kept us there longer than reason said we should have stayed. A lot changed, some of it in ways no one outside of us would notice. She's still herself, sharp, steady, the kind of person who can hold a room with a glance. But there's a softness now, a willingness to sit in quiet without bracing for the weight of it. And me? I stopped chasing noise. I used to fill every silence with words, with jokes, with motion. Now I know that the best parts of being alive sometimes happen in the quiet. A hand barely touching yours across a desk. A breath finally let out after years of holding it in. We didn't make promises. We didn't need to. We learned that not every story has to fight the world to matter. Sometimes it's enough that two people found a way to be honest in a world that teaches you to be everything but. There were nights after when we'd sit on her balcony, not as boss and employee, not as anything that could be neatly explained. Just two people, legs stretched out, city humming below, no script, no next move. I think love, or whatever word you want to put there, is less about declarations than it is about permission. To see someone fully, to be seen without having to hide the bent, cracked, unflattering parts. That's what she gave me. That's what I tried to give back. If you're listening to this, maybe you've had something like it. Or maybe you're still waiting for the world to quiet down long enough for you to feel it. Either way, I hope you know it doesn't have to be perfect to be real. It just has to be human. Thanks for letting me share this. If it stirred something in you, a memory, a question, maybe just a feeling you haven't named yet, leave it below. Sometimes just putting it into words is how we find each other.